This episode, we'll talk about the latest status on Metaplanet, how they're executing on their 555 plan, and what our expectations therefore are for the year, and how things are looking if we look forward a little bit in the coming years and the competition with the other leveraged Bitcoin equities or BTC treasury companies. Welcome to Metaplanet Roundtable episode 4. My name is Anders, and I have here with me here a star-studded, phenomenal, and incredibly smart panel with Climb That Ladder, Khristina and Blake. This is June 24th, and the price of Bitcoin is around 105,000, and the price of Metaplanet is around $10.50. Climb, good to see you. How are you doing?
Good morning. How's it going?
Good. And you're good? You're waking up?
So far, so good. Coffee and a burrito.
Nice. Khristina, welcome back. It's been a while, almost 24 hours since the last time you were on the show here. And I think that was so enjoyable, and just such great takes from you with your Wall Street background and just an analytical ability and 25 years track record of dealing with stocks. So good to have you back. How are you this evening?
Thank you. Well, it's noon here, so doing great. Thanks for having me back. I hope I have something incremental to contribute in such a short amount of time.
We'll take it as it comes, but I am sure I already know the answer on that. Blake, also good to see you, man. In my SoCal LPE fellow DGen compadre. For those who don't know, SoCal is Southern California. How's it going, buddy?
Dude, it's going great. Life is good. Being a Bitcoiner, being in Bitcoin treasuries, it's just so great. Life is good, man.
Nice.
Good to be.
And thanks for being here. All right, let's jump right into it. So we Blake and Climb, you were both here last Tuesday. I was streaming out of a hotel room in Prague while I was down there for BTC Prague. Has anything happened? Anything surprised you since last Tuesday that has changed any of your outlook? We didn't know how much Bitcoin Metaplanet was going to buy, but they bought 1,111, which was a little bit more than a 10% increase. In the meantime, MSGR bought 246. Climb, has anything changed for you?
No, and some people are getting impatient. I think so. We know that Evo shorted 30 million shares. Most of that was June 9th, 10th, and 11th, and then some of that was a little more recently. And yesterday was day one of the 555 plan. So I don't know if there's like a 1 or 2 day delay on Metaplanet receiving the funds, that were gathered a couple of weeks ago mostly. And then we also, some of us speculate that they may have sold a lot more than 30 million shares, maybe closer to 50 or even 60 million shares. So, those of us that are able to stay patient are expecting a big buy. It could happen tonight. It could happen next Monday. I sort of expect it to happen sometime between tonight and next Monday.
Interesting. So you actually think that they'll start tapping in to this plan already? Well, do you mean by that an announcement to come before Monday, or they're buying now and then announcing Monday?
They've likely already started buying. So I think that the Florida subsidiary, and we'll probably talk about that a little more later, but I think that, part of the announcement was that they've already finished raising the initial 250 million. And I could be wrong, but I think that means that they already got paid for at least the 30 million shares that we know of that were sold sort of early to mid-July, or sorry, June. And, because that would be, somewhere around 280 million or something like that. So I think that that's why they were saying the initial funding is done. At least I'm pretty sure. So yeah, I would expect, just based on the shares that have already been sold, I would expect pretty substantial buy and potentially some debt payoff. And that debt they've kept the debt lower than the money that's guaranteed to come to them. So it's like if there's a check in the mail to you, for like 100 grand, and if you go out and buy a car for 50 grand, that's sort of the situation they're in.
And that has been the situation the whole time, right? Because I remember asking you, I think that was 2 weeks ago before we went live. What about this debt they have, and it's short term? And what if, you know, the price of Bitcoin for some reason crashes and stays subdued for 6 months, but it's less than what they have coming in, which means it's very low risk, really, what they're doing on that front.
Yeah, it's lower than even just the money that we know that they have coming in, just essentially from like June 9th, 10th, and 11th. And that's pretty much all of their debt. And then, you know, chances are they were able to start selling yesterday. Since, you know, yesterday was hopefully I say this right, but yesterday was the only day as of the start of the plan where they could also, you know, get the guaranteed buy price of 1388 yen. So yesterday was their biggest opportunity, other than, you know, what they were able to sell before the plan started, to lock in a spread, and then it's going to be selling into strength kind of pretty soon.
Sounds good. Blake, you were also here last Tuesday. You happy with the purchase? A weekly BTC yield of 11%. And what you expected? Anything changed for you in terms of the 555?
No, it's exactly what's expected. It's the forward guidance that he mentioned, and they're exceeding it. So, you know, going back to him, or this CEO Simon mentioning that their forward guidance, but then overachieving that, which is going back to Climb's models and what his kind of predictions are. So no, it's right in line with what I'd expect. And I'm, you know, continually curious about why Metaplanet will be able to continue to outperform others, and just kind of understand the trade-offs and dynamics between newer Bitcoin treasury companies as well as kind of older ones, and kind of what the trade-offs there are. And that's, but no, this is exactly as expected.
Yeah, and that is, in my opinion, the hot topic. What's it called? Spoiler alert. In my conclusion is same as Climb, and I think also Khristina, you can speak for yourself, of course, Khristina, that Metaplanet really is the place you want to be right now. But that dynamic between 100 different companies that are either public already, they're about to go public, like where do you want to put your basket? But we are all here for one reason, I think, and that is that Simon and Dylan on Metaplanet are killing it. They're knocking it out of the ballpark, and it's not even expensive, in my opinion. None of what we say is financial advice compared to what they're performing over there. It's really looking promising, in my opinion. Khristina, you're here for the first time, and good to have you as part of Metaplanet Roundtable. I can't believe it's already episode 4, because I feel like we just I started just covering it, or we did, also with Climb and Blake here. But what's your thoughts on Metaplanet, and what's the position of that in your portfolio?
I mean, it's absolutely the top position, far and away. I think I have a 40% allocation now across my total invested assets. Any of the other companies that I've bought have really just been, you know, small starter positions that I've ended up, you know, just using as trading vehicles for income. Metaplanet is the only one that I really own and plan to continue to own. And that comes down to, you know, the quality of the management team, which is top quality. They have a very clear strategy in place, which they've articulated and are executing on, and are, you know, going above expectations. In addition, you know, it's a pristine balance sheet. I was just taking a look at their balance sheet the other day, when I was getting some questions from other people in terms of, you know, their debt. And, you know, there's been questions that have circulated online for other companies in terms of, well, what if we get a bear market? You know, which of the companies would be in a position where they would have to sell their Bitcoin? Metaplanet is not going to be in a position to need to sell their Bitcoin. I think we would have to see Bitcoin below 10,000 for that to happen. And so, yeah, I mean, I love Metaplanet.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about the bear market scenario, because, you know, I've made the point, at least to myself, that even if something, you know, bad were to happen and they have to sell 10% of their portfolio, you know, of their Bitcoin stack in 2 years, they're still going to be up, you know, 10, 20x in terms of their Bitcoin stack. So even in in a bad, the worst case scenario, they're still going to be up. And it's something almost I'd sign up for, knowing that they might have to sell that. I don't think they will, but it's interesting to think about the bad or worst case scenario, or something horrible were to happen and they had to get rid of all their debt and they had to sell Bitcoin to do it. You're still gonna be in a better place, if you're in the investment for a year or something like that. So I think that's something to think about as well.
To be fair, I think we have to mention that neither Metaplanet or Strategy or Blockchain Group, SWC, or anyone else, as far as I know, granted there's 100 now, have put their Bitcoin up as collateral. So none of them should be in danger of getting that famous margin call and lose the house. That being said, one thing that's kind of become apparent to me now, where Strategy is not really yielding too much, and also the mNAV has become low, and it's not a lot of happening basically right now for Strategy, and hopefully that'll change with S&P 500 inclusion and getting credit ratings on their 3 different preferred stocks. But I remember when I was explaining MSTR to people, even back Q1 this year or last year, that it was about a leverage play, that they had debt. So what they need is the price of Bitcoin to go up. And then that means that MSTR will go up faster. Last year, Bitcoin went up 2.5x, Strategy went up 6.5x. These are rough numbers for last year. But what's interesting in a climb, I know you know a lot more about that. I think what's really interesting here is that Metaplanet, that we all love here, they're able to generate an incredible yield without the price of Bitcoin moving up, simply because there is such a volume and demand for their shares that they can just run. I mean, Bitcoin can trade sideways from here until 20 years. And by that time, Metaplanet will have 2.1 million Bitcoin. Klein, what's your thoughts on that? On them being able to accumulate Bitcoin despite the price of Bitcoin not moving up, that engine of accumulation is running.
Yeah, I mean, they need Bitcoin to work eventually. Once they have something like preferred shares, then they will be technically arbitraging the Bitcoin CAGR versus the yield they pay out. So it'll become more important, lower risk in a way, but also in a way more important on Bitcoin price. Yeah, so they have less debt right now than they can cover with the incoming money. Their focus is on increasing Bitcoin per share. I've looked a lot at that, and I think in Vegas, maybe Simon on stage showed a chart where they showed that they were doubling it on average every 92 days, their Bitcoin per share. And what I'm looking at now is the real numbers with these last few buys, I suppose, are considerably faster than that. And then sort of the best fit line is even faster than that. And then if you look at the last, like since February or so, since the 210 million plan started, it's even faster than that. So it's really neat. I mean, it's not too far from maybe 70 days if you look at the shorter term best fit, on the majority of this year. But yeah, they are a yield machine. I think they're over 300% yield year to date. Their goal is 600%. I imagine they'll crush that considerably.
Yeah, and you're bringing something up there that Khristina and I spoke about yesterday, and I just want to share that quickly also on screen here, because let's which one shows the I'm just trying to get the number. Yeah, that's the biggest I can get, and we're not covering anything there. Thank you for not covering the numbers there, Blake and Khristina. Anyways, so I think, like, talking about lifetime yield, talking about year to date, it's all cute and nice, but we almost have an entire quarter behind us now in Q2. And I think it's relevant to see, as a shareholder, what are you driving right now of yield? And comparing Metaplanet, Strategy, and Blockchain Group, then you find the BTC yield quarter to date as the 4th lowest number here. And just to take them from bottom up, Strategy has generated 5.5% Bitcoin yield quarter to date. Blockchain Group has generated 64.5%, and Metaplanet has generated almost 108%. And I think as you're talking about climb, there's an acceleration and definitely just flawless execution. And the way I look at it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, they are the most efficient Bitcoin generating machine out there right now. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly very heavy in Metaplanet, but that's how I view it. Just depends on which metrics, and obviously there's a lot of small companies that can go. I'm not making fun of them, but they can go from 10 to 100 Bitcoin lickety split without seeming to talk to anybody. It's pretty neat. But yeah, it's also cool that quarter two Metaplanet yield is higher already than quarter one. And part of that is they were really setting up they were trying to fine tune their ATM-like system, their moving strike warrants. And so with the 210 million plan, there's quite a bit of downtime, sort of end of the year until really like mid-February, where they were kind of around that 1,700 Bitcoin holdings part. So, that cost them a decent amount of time, and they didn't have it set up where Evo, their partner that sort of sells the shares essentially, could really front run that to the same degree and with the same level of safety as they are with this plan. So even with this downtime that we've had recently, May 19th was the end of the 210 million plan. June 24th today is the start of the 555 plan. So, a good month there, but they've actually been active and sort of, already issued, more than 5%. It's somewhere between 5 and 10%. We'll find out soon, but of those shares of the 555 plan.
And speaking of, right now we have 545 live viewers, and thank you everyone for checking in. So close to the 555. Khristina, we discussed it a little bit yesterday, but some viewers weren't here yesterday, and I think I might have influenced you to get out of Blockchain Group and focus on Metaplanet to some extent, looking at those quarter to date yield numbers. So what's your take on the engine of Metaplanet right now and the speed at which it's generating Bitcoin for the shareholders?
I mean, I'm very happy. I'm very impressed. And you did convince me to get out of my blockchain yesterday. It was just a small trade anyway. But when I was looking at the mNAV and I was looking at the yield, there was really absolutely no reason to continue to hold blockchain versus a Metaplanet. There's a part of me that thinks my Metaplanet position is already so big that I don't want to continue to allocate, additional capital to it just in terms of, risk management. But at the end of the day, there's no reason to hold something else that, doesn't look as good from a valuation perspective. And I think Metaplanet, as I've continued to say, has the best management team and the plan that I understand the most, and I have confidence in their ability to execute it.
Yeah, absolutely. And by no means this is anything negative about Blockchain Group. I think they're gonna absolutely kill it and generate a lot of yield, and things can go up and down, and they might have a stronger Q3. But also currently their mNAV is higher than Metaplanet, that is growing faster, and for that reason, that's the one I'm staying in. Blake, what's your thoughts on the smoothness of the engine and yield being generated right now at Metaplanet?
Yeah, it's obviously very exciting, and kind of what Khristina was talking about. It's interesting to think, the analogy that I have in my head is that we're betting on a horse that's 10 times faster, and you don't put 80% of your portfolio on the one that's 10 times faster, and then 20% on the one that's, 1/10 as fast, just for diversification. That one's going much, much faster. And the key for me is to understand why it's going to continue to go faster than the other, and what the market dynamics are to continue to give them, Metaplanet, the tools to outpace the other Bitcoin treasury companies out there. And I feel like Climb is on the same page just because he's, you know, his I think almost all of his portfolio in terms of Bitcoin treasury companies is Metaplanet. So I think that's the logical thing to do, and kind of makes sense.
Yeah, Climb doesn't mess around. He's heavy in Metaplanet, aren't you, Climb?
Yeah, I can't help it. If I see something good, I mean, you know, what's the saying? Something like, you know, put your money where it's treated best. And so that's where it is. It's the whole point, I think, for all of us is to find things that outperform Bitcoin. And of course, you know, that comes with its own risks. And I do leave enough cash on the side where I'll be fine no matter what. But my conviction couldn't be higher.
No, I completely agree. And there, I'll help you there. There's another saying as well that supports doing what you're doing, and that is, I'd rather have just my one egg in the basket and just watch it closely instead of having your eggs spread out in several baskets. But choose the better one and just keep your eyes on it every day. And I got a feeling that's exactly what you're doing. Climb. Should we take a look at the first graph that you sent me, just to so you can take us through that and your thinking a little bit?
Yeah, sounds great.
There you go. Let me
Okay.
see. That might be better. Then we can see the dates as well.
Yeah, and so I want to keep. Somebody actually asked on X for this for a log chart of this, and they may. I imagine they'll probably add that to their analytics page at some point, because people loved it when Simon shared you know, their version of this chart in Vegas a few weeks back, and they tend to be pretty quick about updating. Like if anybody's been around their analytics page, even just the last month and a half, it's evolved quite a bit, and they are listening to the community. They want to share things that really show off their history and their potential, and how clean their growth has been. So, you know, you can kind of see with this, and this is on a log chart. So, you know, if this was on a linear chart, it would just be you know, a parabolic sort of curve up. But this is a very good fit with that trend line. If you take it sort of from April 29th, which was essentially day one, like I think it's weekly data on their website. So I got the weekly data from that, but it's a doubling of their Bitcoin per share, which again is like the huge reason that I'm here. If they couldn't increase their Bitcoin per share, if they couldn't 10x, and that's the first question I asked myself before I knew the difference between Metaplanet and Semler and, you know, anybody else, if they couldn't increase their Bitcoin per share by 10x, being as small as they are, I would not have been interested. You know, once they're bigger, the story changes and the investment thesis for me will change. But right now, I'm interested in growth, and I think it's the prime time for finding a company that can really execute the way that, you know, to the degree that you trust that they can. Right? So trust, you know, I have trust issues. Numbers help with that. Charts help with that. I'm very logical, but I also am very sort of intuitive, and I like extrapolating things. When I see a graph like this, and all of their graphs essentially look like this, it's really neat. So when I see a graph like this, and realize that that's over something like 426 days, maybe a little bit more than that, it's extremely predictable. And I also look at, like I was saying, when they're 210 million plan, you know, that doesn't mean it will be predictable. That just means that I think my odds of it sticking somewhat to this or better are pretty good. But yeah, if you look at sort of when it got really tight with that orange trend line there, that was around the February, sort of mid-February timeframe. And that's when their 210 million plan started. February 17th, I think, was day one for that. So since then, they have been extremely tight on their execution. And it's not like they knew that I was going to make this graph, you know, today and talk about it. It's not like they've been planning for the last few months because this graph was going to be shown on your show today. Like,
No.
executing, and it's turned out this way. And it's funny because if you look at mNAV, you might think that they could only execute this cleanly, you know, over like a 4 or 5 month period, and really over the whole time, but especially the last 4 or 5 months. you may think that they could only execute that cleanly if mNAV was like stable, but that's not the case. They've been able to do it with mNAV, at 6, with mNAV at 2.9. They try not to dilute anything under 3, and they really try to dilute heavier at the higher mNAVs. I guess it's fair to say it's just more efficient. It's actually less of a shareholder burden from a dollar perspective per yield. I think is kind of a safe way to put that. But yeah, 77 days to double their Bitcoin per share. In Vegas, Simon shared that it was like 92 and a half days, something like that. In reality now, I think it's 85. If you look at like around the first day they bought Bitcoin to today, it's about 85. Like they've 34x'd, I think, their Bitcoin per share since the start, since they had just under 100 Bitcoin. They've 100x'd or more than 100x their Bitcoin, and maybe tripled their share count, so it comes out to like a 34 total of Bitcoin per share. And you can see that since February, that trend line is actually showing a lower slope than reality. The blue line, the reality is actually showing a decently higher slope, and it might not look like much, but on an exponential, that's pretty neat. So I'll continue to graph this out and see where it goes. I think they're about to accelerate.
I like the sound of that. And what makes you say that they're about to accelerate if this is such a beautiful straight line on a log chart?
One thing that's really, really important, and why I focus on volume, how many shares are traded per day versus how many shares they have, is especially with something like this, as early on as their story is. And if you look at their OTC tickers that had like virtually no volume until recently, until really the last, month or two, I consider most of that volume inflows, or, at least a large part, larger than people might expect to be inflows. These companies, a lot of people like, there might be things that have 20 or 30 mNAV, but the question is, what is the capacity for a certain country to get interested and hold that stock long term? And I see Japan as very underexposed to this, but also very excited. So they're very excited for the size that the company is. There's a ton of excitement, and there's a lot of room for growth, even just regionally there. And of course, all the regional advantages, low interest rates, preferreds, all that, like the execution that Simon and Dylan and the team are doing. But, and Dylan, posted the word accelerate, something like that, right after the 555 plan got announced. They saw how well the 210 million plan went. I think that they sort of internally planned on that taking something like 6 months. It took about 3 months, basically 60 trading days, and they sold the last half of the shares in 11 straight trading days in May, with price going up against it. So they see a crazy amount of demand, and I think that they've set this plan up to last, 6 months, maybe a little bit more than 6 months, something like that. Let's probably the end of the year. And if you try to cram that, if you try to model that out, even if they sold all the shares for the current price around $10, they would raise $5 billion. They would buy 50,000 Bitcoin. They would be at 60,000 Bitcoin at the end of the year. And that to me would be a pretty bearish scenario. And that would put them in second place on the public company leaderboard. So yeah, just trying to cram all that in. They don't have to have another plan in the middle of this. This is one large plan. They can just execute when they need to. They won't sell shares every day, obviously. They'll sell into strength. Sort of a 3-day rolling close average, or average rolling close, whatever. And yeah, we'll be able to see that soon with disclosures that come out over the next few days. But I think that we'll probably leave this orange line pretty soon to the upside. Not dramatically. It's a log chart, so even a little bit is really huge. Each one of the horizontal lines there is a double, so it's a log base 2 chart. So it's pretty easy to see where the next doubling of Bitcoin per share is on this chart.
Nice. And if you're saying that it's a conservative bet that we are at, or that they are at 55,000 Bitcoin on the balance sheet by the end of the year, and let's say that this rate of doubling Bitcoin per share actually drops from 78 days to 90 days. That means 4 doubling of the Bitcoin per share next year, but it may fall further, the speed. But let's just play that out. That means 55,000 Bitcoin 1st of January. It means 110,000 Bitcoin end of Q1 next year, 220 by end of Q2 next year, 440,000 Bitcoin by the end of Q3 next year, and 880,000 Bitcoin by the end of next year. Climb, is anything further you want to add there, or otherwise I'll check in with Khristina and Blake and see if they're blown away by your analysis yet here, or
just one quick thing. I think it was maybe September or October of last year. It would be hell trying to find the tweet now, but and I'm still going to call them tweets because what are you going to call it? But MicroStrategy, when they held, I think, just under 1%, maybe 180 or 200,000 Bitcoin or something like that. And 210,000 is the 1% mark, right? So like they held just under that. And I made a bullish post about MicroStrategy, and I said, here's sort of what they could do year by year, or I think I broke it down year by year. But it ended up with them hitting, somewhere probably between 500,000 and 1 million Bitcoin, and not even rolling out more than that. And the reason that I believed, other than just extrapolation, right? Extrapolation was a large part of that, but I don't let that go unchecked. Like, the reason I think they're able to get away with that is because the world is slow to adopt Bitcoin. Because the world is slow to adopt Bitcoin, even if you look at the US Bitcoin ETFs, how many Bitcoin they have, I think it's under 1 million total. You look at the treasury companies, how many Bitcoin they have, that's under 1 million total. So you have less than 5% in both of those buckets. And 10% total of all this demand that everyone thinks is here is barely 10% of the total supply. And I know there's lost coins and stuff, but I think it's still, let's say around 10% that's sort of been gobbled up by the ETFs and these businesses. There's no reason they can't double or triple, their overall exposure, as long as other companies and countries sit on the sidelines and let it happen. And so it's sort of a bet that other players are going to let it happen, that other players are slow, just as much as it is a bet in Metaplanet's own execution. So yeah, I'm definitely not ruling out them hitting 500,000 Bitcoin or even more, because I think that they can do it quickly. If it would take them 10 years, then the competition would be too fierce and it would be a lot harder. Even price aside, just the amount of Bitcoin available. Essentially, I mean, there's always going to be something at a certain price, but I think that's still sort of fair to say.
I love it. I get more bullish every time I listen to you here on the Metaplanet Roundtable, Climb. Really appreciate it. Khristina, what's your thoughts there?
I mean, I am super appreciative of all of Climb's work, the time, the generosity. I mean, he is nonstop with what he shares for the community. And he's a lot of the reason that I have so much conviction in the story as I do. And I thought the banter this morning online was worth mentioning for no one who saw it, between Michael Saylor and Simon, the CEO of Metaplanet, where Saylor posted, "Metaplanet can rise to second place in the Bitcoin 100, then it's a battle." And Simon replied, "That challenge I'll gladly accept." I just really love the dynamic between these two incredible leaders.
I couldn't agree more. It's fun and games, and everybody wins. And those guys will all be flying private jets. They won't lack a thing. Everything's good. Blake, your thoughts here on the straight line on the log linear chart? Was it a log chart or a log linear? I'm not exactly sure of the difference there. But your thoughts, Blake? Blake.
Yeah, well, I appreciate Climb, making these charts. And I'm glad that he mentioned that, he thinks that this could accelerate, because I think that's really something that needs to be talked about a little bit more. Everyone gets worried about these returns, but if you think through it logically, we're still sub 1% adoption of Bitcoin. And these adoption technologies usually hit an inflection point. So there's a strong argument to be made once we hit around 5-10% of adoption that we're going to continue to increase. And I think the same thing can be said for Metaplanet in terms of their accumulation. And the way that, I'm thinking through that is that, we've got zombie companies, and a lot of these companies that were now famous Bitcoin treasury companies were zombie companies. But Metaplanet is the only zombie company in a zombie country. In other words, they've had 0% returns. They've had really poor equity returns. And why that's important is because they feel helpless for the last several decades in terms of finding an investment. And then here comes Metaplanet. And so that S-curve of adoption might be happening right now, where people are saying, hey, this is the only company that's getting real returns and is our hope to have financial freedom, which is why I think it's interesting that, they're only selling into strength, where people can just feel confidently that, hey, the stock price is going to go up, on kind of some 3-month average timeline. So it's very interesting to think about that and what they could do with the fixed income product. So if they launch a fixed income product like Saylor is doing, Simon already said that the fixed income market in Japan would bite his arm off if he were able to offer that product to them. And so if you were able to offer that, launch that now and do the same yield that Saylor is doing, you could see a growth in this number, not a slowing down of this number. So if you think through those kind of dynamics, again, this could increase and not decrease. And this is just a doubling of the Bitcoin. We're not even talking about if they don't have to do as much ATM or share issuance because of the fixed income product. So that this isn't even taking into account the growth or the price appreciation of their stock.
Gotcha. Nice and bullish. That's what we like. I want to jump also to the second of two graphs that you sent, Climb. Let's just take a look at that as well and let us hear what it is you want to share on this. Climb, go ahead.
So this has, and there's a couple now that are over 100%, and so I'll take those off soon to clean up the graph, because they've already, Metaplanet has already exceeded the amount of Bitcoin that H8 and Coinbase, I believe, are the two on here. I believe that's right. Anyway, so you can see this is the ratio in the y-axis is the percentage of Metaplanet's Bitcoin holdings versus Marathon versus XXI versus all these other companies that are ahead of them, or at least, we're ahead of them on the public leaderboard. And so, yeah, every horizontal line, there's a double all the way up to 100% to kind of keep it clean. And the only one I don't have on here is MicroStrategy, because even with the benefits of a log chart, it's still orders of magnitude apart, and it just then kind of scrunches all this together, and it just looks messy. I couldn't figure out a clean way to do it. So I'll add them in at some point. I share sort of the, I'm not trying to leave them out for any benefit or silver lining for Metaplanet's sake here. It's just for the cleanliness of the chart. But I do have, I compare elsewhere the Metaplanet versus MicroStrategy Bitcoin holdings, and that's exponential as well. It's really exactly the same as these lines here. But yeah, all these lines are moving up and to the right in a pretty tight band. And they show that if everybody kept moving at the same growth pace, all of their competition that's equal or greater size than them, and their own growth, if everyone just kept doing the same execution, and I sort of expect a lot of their competition to even slow down a little bit, and for Metaplanet to speed up. So there's sort of a double thing that, you don't need them both to happen, but I expect things to happen sooner than this chart suggests. But even just with what this chart suggests, that sort of right blue arrow, shows that their biggest challenge, which is to have more Bitcoin than Marathon, and Marathon has just under 50,000 Bitcoin, I think. But it shows that if everyone kept growing their Bitcoin holdings at the same rate, that somewhere it looks like mid-November, Metaplanet would be in second place. So, a lot of people are expecting, maybe XXI or somebody else to really start putting on the gas. But, starting a company with a lot of Bitcoin isn't necessarily a good thing. Like if Saylor wasn't a Bitcoiner, or, maybe he was a Bitcoiner, but his company didn't hold any Bitcoin until now, and they were a huge company, and they today decided to buy 600,000 Bitcoin, but they went from 0 to 600. I don't think they would automatically get a double of that in their valuation, like a 2 mNAV. The market really likes history. And so either you start small and have no history, but a lot of potential, or you're, medium size with a good amount of history and a good amount of potential, like Metaplanet. And I consider Metaplanet sort of the Goldilocks zone there. Or you try to start big, and then cross your fingers that investors, that there's enough inflows into your stock, into your company, that really trust who you are, because you have no history as far as to chart out, Bitcoin accumulation. So I think a lot of their competition is really struggling. Obviously, these are all, pretty much everyone on this list is very easy to pass up if you just look at the business model and their execution. Most of their competition has been standing still. So, this isn't a crazy chart or a crazy statement that Metaplanet has a very good chance of being number 2 by the end of the year. I would expect that, and it's just a question of what month is that going to happen for me. It could happen as early as maybe October or something. Honestly, it could happen in September, but sort of October, November would be where I would bet if I had to.
And you kind of have in terms of putting your money in heavily here. Well, not on the exact timing, of course, but just joking there. Khristina, all the companies here that that Climb is comparing Metaplanet's Bitcoin holdings to, they actually, speaking of your name, Climb, like Metaplanet is literally climbing in terms of ownership and percentage compared to all the competitors. Khristina, any thoughts here on this?
Yeah, I think looking at the comparisons, I personally won't invest in the miners anymore. I've been burned by them way too many times. And, aside from the miners, you have Galaxy Digital, which is a more diversified kind of crypto play. I don't know the details of the story that well, but I'm kind of much more Bitcoin first, Bitcoin only at this point. And then, Coinbase. I do have a position in Coinbase, but it's not nearly as large as my position in Metaplanet. And I like their revenue agreement with Circle, the recent stablecoin IPO. And I think they'll be a continued beneficiary of adoption of stablecoins. And so that's why I own that one. But in terms of, Bitcoin growth and the fastest horse, it's absolutely Metaplanet.
Gotcha. And makes sense. Blake, you have some comments here?
Yeah, it's just interesting to look at this and to think that a lot of these companies are kind of Bitcoin adjacent. I want to say they're still measuring themselves in fiat. So, they just have the wrong mindset, and Coinbase being the most obvious example of that, being so early to Bitcoin and still so missing opportunities like what Metaplanet and MicroStrategy are doing, and seeing this graph, it just looks like, going back to our analogy before, Metaplanet is just such the fastest horse. And we have to ask ourselves why, right? What are they doing that's different? And the whole thing is like, Bitcoin is being the store of value, and the biggest competitor for store value is the $350 trillion debt market. What these Bitcoin treasury companies are doing is just accessing that and generating even more substantial outstanding returns than, let's say, a traditional business model where Coinbase and some of these companies are mining or doing business with the Bitcoin ecosystem, they're not acquiring Bitcoin at the rates that they should. And you can see with this graph just how much better these Bitcoin treasury companies, Metaplanet being the obvious one here, I mean, only one that's graphed here, is doing than these other companies that are trying to do something different. Again, they're trying to use Bitcoin, they're Bitcoin adjacent, but they're still kind of measuring themselves, or were measuring themselves in terms of fiat returns versus Bitcoin yield. And now we're seeing how simple the model is to kind of convert that fiat debt into Bitcoin yield, and Metaplanet's the best one doing it right now.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that, and that's why we're here. I also have a graph. Let me see, where did I think, did I send that to you, Climb, or where did I put that? Actually, I'm gonna just have to look at that, I think. But I want to then have a look at and ask you, Climb, if you have any updates to your price projections since last Tuesday, and if not, well, there was I think a lot of people that weren't necessarily here last Tuesday. We have 2,000 live viewers right now, split across X and YouTube. Has anything changed for you here in your model, Climb? Maybe you haven't had time to update it, but there was that purchase announced yesterday. Is this the same scenario now? Too soon to have a look at this again?
Let's see. I think I actually have one that's more recent than this, but
yeah,
I don't know if I can find it quickly enough. But I think the Super Bull is about the same in the 150s, and then I think I moved the bull case down to Bitcoin being 150K instead of 200, and made some other tweaks to some other ones. The base case I updated to finish at the end of this year, because I don't really see the base case being slower than that, honestly.
No.
But so yeah, the pricing in my head of, if I had to pick a 100% range, meaning $10 to $20 or $50 to $100 or whatever for where this stock would be end of year, to me it's in the 50 to 100 range would be where I personally believe it's going to land. A much more conservative version of that would be the 25 to 50 range. And that's more of sort of the slightly bear to base case in my head. These are largely, my opinion, the extrapolations are fun, but the numbers get so ridiculous when you compound like certain mNAVs. So all of my models always have mNAV dropping, every day by a small amount. And the amount of dilution that they're able to do drop as time goes on with the higher prices and stuff. And that's why you see sort of a lot of the action happening, in the first month or two, and then a little bit of a slowing down. But again, this is on a log price chart. I stuck with the binary numbers just because it was kind of fun there.
Yeah. But let's totally, anytime you make updates to these, and I guess big purchases from Metaplanet there go a little bit ahead of your conservative budgeting within these, because I know you're trying to keep it conservative and sandbag to not disappoint yourself. Then we'll take a look at the new graph next Tuesday, if possible. Khristina, do you have some? I don't know. Have you seen that those price projections from Climb before?
I have, because I tune into every episode that him and Vince host.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and I love that he loves math. I mean, he makes it fun.
That's good. Agree. Blake, any updates from your side in terms of bullishness for the year or price projections, or I were liking here what Climb is saying? Where do you see Bitcoin go end of year and mNAV, and then we can kind of figure out where that would put Metaplanet according to?
Well, yeah, I love all the graphs and the math that Climb does, but it's nice to model out, and it's great to do the actual math behind it. But for me, it's just the opportunity cost. Like I don't think anyone else is going to beat them. So whether they go to 150, 160, or they're at 100, I still think they're going to be the best performing Bitcoin treasury company on a risk adjusted basis. So I think, that's important to kind of think through. So no, I think that's it. That's my only thought on that graph. It's just, it's the best opportunity cost right now of capital, especially if you're just thinking about allocating to a Bitcoin treasury company.
Metaplanet is the hurdle rate. There's nothing to say about that. All right, so I like this one, the updated version of the BTC Treasury stacking race from MicroStrategist, where the yellow line is Metaplanet. Again, it's the execution is very exponential at a steady race or pace, but leaning upwards very nicely. And then the orange one is the blockchain group, also nice aggressive pace. And then, of course, some of the smaller, newer leveraged Bitcoin equities like SWC and H100 are steep at an earlier pace, but SWC has been making some waves again this week with a single purchase, giving them more than 50% BTC yield in a week. That's impressive. But any thoughts on this climb? I guess it's similar to what we looked at before, the one with the lock linear chart, and you think a slight acceleration, right?
Yeah, I think Metaplanet accelerates, and I think that what people are going to see is when a lot of these companies hit between like the 1 and 10,000 Bitcoin held, their market cap is so much more substantial. They're not going to, move 200 or 300% in a day. And right now it's a very, just like it's a different phase for Metaplanet versus Strategy. Strategy is really cementing everything. They have the preferreds, which essentially warrant greater than 1 mNAV. It's a very creative way to do that. If you base it just on ATM, just on accretive dilution, then it's sort of a positive feedback loop where, to some extent, right, within sort of realistic terms, but the higher the mNAV, the higher the yield, the higher the mNAV, the higher the yield. And you end up with this almost runaway positive feedback loop that's then only tapered by volume and other market forces, let's say. But when you get, under 2 mNAV, 2 and 3 mNAV is really the critical point. 3 is really efficient. Anything above 3 is really efficient. Between 2 and 3 is okay. It's pretty good, but it's just, not great. And then under 2, it just gets really hard to accretively dilute. I think the math is like if you were at like a 1.2 mNAV, and if you sold like an infinite number of shares to the market, let's say you 10 times your share count overnight, and like the market was able to buy all those at a 1.2 mNAV. And then if you bought Bitcoin with that, you would only provide, a maximum of 20% Bitcoin yield, I believe is how the math works. So it's really funny to sort of think about, and that's a single dilution event. Obviously, if you spread it out over time, it gets better. But the companies are going to find the mNAV compression for the smaller companies is going to be a lot more severe, I believe, than most people are ready for. And that's not bearish. The prices still may be much higher. As we see with Metaplanet, every time they announce that they just earned another 20% yield, not 20% from the start of the year, but like, 20% today versus yesterday, let's say, because that's a very different thing. But when they earn 20% yield, it shifts their whole mNAV scale by 20%. Is just the cleanest way to think about it. So if the price goes sideways, then we're actually at a lower mNAV and we're actually trading more conservatively than we were. And then the market tends to sort of catch up. But there will be mNAV compression. That's why it's in all of my models. And, companies that are trading at, a 10 or 20, 30 mNAV won't be trading at a 10 or 20, 30 mNAV when they have, 3 or 5 or 10,000 Bitcoin, I don't think. The market cap just gets too big, and the money can be treated better elsewhere. Once that seed has really grown into a sapling with these other companies, then a lot of that temporary money goes and finds other seeds and bets on them turning into saplings. And then, strategy is a tree. And I don't know, Metaplanet's a bonsai, I guess, is a good one. So,
Or the Last Samurai, the samurai warrior that is looking for the perfect. I don't know what they're called. Those trees with is it pink flowers or white flowers? You've seen Last Samurai, right?
yeah, but it's been forever. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's been a while. Great movie, by the way. I should watch it again soon. Yeah, Khristina or Blake, any comments on that?
I have not
Yeah.
seen Samurai.
You've not seen The Last Samurai?
No.
You have to, as a Metaplanet shareholder, you gotta understand Japanese culture. You have to see The Last Samurai.
I have been to Tokyo before, and I do hope to go for the AGM in March or April, whenever the dates are finalized. So that's definitely on the list.
Yeah, I haven't even been to Japan though, so there you have it. I'd love to go for a Metaplanet event. It'd be great if we could all meet over there in person. Blake, what about you? Are you gonna come over for a shareholder meeting?
Yeah, I've been to Japan. I do plan to go back, and I would try to line it with the shareholder meeting and do a cruise out there. So I am interested in checking out Japan again. Amazing culture. So if no one's been, it's highly recommended. But it is interesting. I wanted to talk about the mNAV a little bit more and kind of the game theory there, because I find it a very interesting metric, at least that a lot of Bitcoiners are trying to use it as almost a forward price to earnings ratio or discounted cash flow analysis. In other words, they're trying to use it to say, is this overvalued or undervalued compared to other companies, especially with Adam Back's months to cover. But I think it's an interesting metric because it's those other two metrics, the financial metrics that I mentioned before, price to earnings, those tools can never be used to make the company better, if that makes sense. So if they have a really high price to earnings ratio, they couldn't sell, half of their enterprise value of their company and put it into Bitcoin and have this flywheel go so quickly, right? They'd reach limits within their ecosystem. They'd have to build the real estate. They'd have to build the chips, manufacturing. They only have so much of a customer base that can scale, Salesforce, Google, whatever. But with the mNAV, it's interesting, and I think important to realize that the game theory behind it for the management team to be able to use the tool to generate yield. So again, Klein mentioned the flywheel. It's like, okay, cool. If the mNAV is very high, the premium is very high, a lot of Bitcoin investors, I want to stay away from that. But that just means that they can have a higher Bitcoin yield, which is why we're here. So it's almost like you've got to get away from that mindset, and look at the yield that they're generating. And then that warrants a higher mNAV, and then they can use that as a tool. So it's more like a spring than a real investment tool, like a price to earnings ratio or doing a discounted cash flow analysis, which is all the discounted cash flow analysis is doing, if people aren't familiar, is looking at all the cash flows that they're going to generate, let's say, for the next 20 or 30 years, and trying to put a number on it for today so they can make a good purchase of that company stock or not. And so we don't have that right now for these Bitcoin treasury companies. We know that they're generating a ton of value, but we haven't come with a mathematical formula to do that. And mNAV, unfortunately, is kind of the closest that we have, but I don't think it's even potentially worth talking about. And I don't mean talking about from the game theory that Klein was talking about, where when the mNAV is 10, what is that going to do once they sell stock, and how much torque is that going to give the stock? I'm just talking about more from like, how do we value this company? And because they use it as a tool to generate yield, and they can compress it if the CEO decides down to 1 or let it run to 20, it's a harder metric to use. And those other metrics, price to earnings and discounted cash flow analysis, the companies are trying to improve, but there's not a game theory that the CEO can just come in and say, hey, we're going to do discounted cash flow analysis or price to earning ratio, and we're going to sell that to buy more assets to generate more yield. That's not there in those models. So I think it's important to realize this from if you're a new Bitcoiner or even coming from traditional finance, that this isn't that metric because of that dynamic. And I think it's good to understand that. And I'd love to understand what Climb and Khristina think.
Yeah, Climb and Khristina, what's your thoughts on that? Then I'll chime in.
Climb, you want to go first?
Yeah.
Do you like me to go?
Yeah, actually go ahead.
Okay. I mean, we were talking, I think, Anders, a little bit about it yesterday, just from like a traditional finance background. Historically, when companies are looking at PE and they have a very high PE, I mean, it's indicative of the market assigning a valuation based on their growth dynamics, right? So higher PE typically means higher growth. And I think that's what the market is doing with some of these Bitcoin treasury companies, where the higher mNAV is just indicative of their higher growth profile. We talked about yesterday comparing like a MicroStrategy to a Metaplanet. I mean, MicroStrategy's mNAV is, compressed at this point, and it's being valued more as a value stock because the rapid growth is not there right now, versus a Metaplanet who does have a much higher mNAV and is growing much more quickly.
I agree. Climb, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, thinking about mNAV, like Blake was talking about, the way that it intertwines, especially in the early stages. Not every company, some companies are doing like the Bitcoin bonds and other things, and I'm personally not too big a fan of some of those other methods, partly because they're not battle tested, I guess you could say. And something else about them feels a little bit too close to a pre-mine to me, so I stay away from that. Whether that's fair or not, I don't know. I just don't have the time to investigate. But I'm not sure what the ARB is exactly there either. But the using mNAV to grow from the start, like Metaplanet did. MicroStrategy didn't do this. They already had $500 million in cash. And when Bitcoin was a lot cheaper, they bought, however much, 50,000 Bitcoin or whatever their sort of initial purchase was, in one go. They went from zero to more than Metaplanet has today, I believe, in one go. The game's changed now. And yeah, with mNAV tying so closely into their potential to produce yield, both today and soon, the assumptions are the key there probably. And I think intuitively for me, that's where I look at history, sustained volume, how hungry a country is for something. And that's why often I refer to sort of the dynamics going on as a resizing and not a repricing of Metaplanet, because there's just so much capital that I think is hungry for this and gets convinced by every successive success that the company has. People take them more seriously now that they have over 10,000 Bitcoin versus I've been in less than 2 months. I mean, it sounds crazy, but less than 2 months, and they had 5,000 Bitcoin when I got in. To that sort of in Bitcoin per share, or the Bitcoin doubling every 2 months, they've done it faster than that since I've been in, and they've never been this large of a company, obviously. So, the mNAV affecting the valuation different than PE is actually super interesting, and I definitely would not be for Metaplanet trying to use the moving strike warrants, trying to use the new share issuance on their common shares to just, from now until, 10, 20 years from now, to just sell the premium that the market constantly gives them. It works with a smaller company. It works with a medium-sized company. The mNAV compresses to some extent as companies get much larger. When they're holding 100,000 Bitcoin, they may or may not be at 6 mNAV. I would not expect them to be at 6 mNAV. If they are, that's bonus points. Maybe they'll be at 4, maybe they'll be at 3. Who knows? But preferreds are the huge opportunity. I'm crossing my fingers personally that they announce a vote on that in September, because I think that there's actually a decent chance they'll have 50,000 Bitcoin by then. So, I think that they could do that and then just slowly issue those, test the waters, because Metaplanet seems to be very good about testing the waters and seeing what the market is hungry for. The time between the 210 million plan, or like before the 210 million plan, you could see mNAV run up. And I've talked before about that being extremely valuable feedback for the company, because the question is, when you stop selling shares temporarily, if you permanently stop selling shares, the market would see that you'll never provide a yield again because you've given up, and then they wouldn't assign you a premium. But if you temporarily stop selling shares, then you really get to see what the market wants the price to be at without selling pressure, essentially. It's sort of short term, so it's a little messy. It's not perfect, but you really get to take the lid off the pot and see what happens. So they routinely kind of bake that in, and whether they do that with that sort of foresight, or if it just sort of happened that way, I don't really care. The feedback they seem to really use to see where mNAV can go, and know where the prime dilution, for their next plan is going to be. And yeah, I'm excited, and I can't wait until they, I think they'll very, very high chance to me that they'll hit 20,000, that they'll hit higher than 20,000 Bitcoin in July. I sort of expect them to be around 15,000 Bitcoin at the end of June or within the first couple of days of July. So if they start the month with 15, maybe they end the month at 20 or 25, or who knows, something like that.
It's wild. But I think it's wild, but a very likely outcome of the execution we're seeing there right now. I also do hope that that Metaplanet opens up on those preferreds, not only so that they can raise a lot of funds on very accretive terms, but also personally, like, I would warn everyone against using any type of margin, because it's just a matter of time before you blow your account. But for something like Strike, which is the preferred stock from MSTR that does have a built-in perpetual forever call option without expiration, I have allowed myself to buy Strike pretty much close to maxing out my margin, because the cost of the margin is close to what Strike is paying in dividend, and then I have 40% MSTR upside within those, as in 40% of the value, just shy of 40% of the value of Strike perpetual or preferred stock is the value of the call option. And if Metaplanet offers a similar preferred stock, and the underlying stock, the call option built in, is on a stock that is yielding a more than 100% Bitcoin per share a quarter, that's a lot more exciting than the situation that Strategy has itself in right now. All of that being said, I haven't sold any Strategy for Metaplanet, at least not yet, and I do see S&P 500 inclusion, and the potential credit ratings, that should be a matter of time for the preferreds to be an upside. And so when you look at the three preferred stocks that Strategy has, the Strike one, I think because of the volatility and vitality of Metaplanet, the stock, and the upwards movement, that would be more interesting from them. But if you look at Stride and Strife, that has no built-in call option, and all they care about is how big is the company? Is it in a big index? All right, it's got a better credit rating. How many Bitcoin do they have on the balance sheet? Okay, they have a lot. Then that will be actually an advantage for Strategy that they have by that time 700,000 Bitcoin. They're in the S&P 500, and it'll be a while before any of the other companies are in something similar. S&P 500 is no joke, and that's because of the juggernaut size of Strategy. So even though Metaplanet produces this straight preferred stock that are just fixed income products with no built-in call option, I see that Strategy actually could have a foothold there and a stronghold. and hopefully just break that dam of $300 trillion yield starving capital on legacy finance, and just let that capital run through the funnel of strategy, and them taking the arbitrage, they're earning the arbitrage over when that capital flows to Bitcoin when the yield is a lot higher. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can. Clem, do you have a response?
Go ahead, Blake.
So it's sometimes hard to see Climber. Obviously, can't see him, so I don't know if he's trying to talk or not. What was I going to say? Yeah, no, it's interesting to think about those fixed income products coming online, especially for Metaplanet, because they provide the most torque or more value accretion for the company and then the shareholders, and it's the most scalable. So, the 300 trillion is the most exciting, and it's the most rational amount that you can tap into. So if you can provide a 5 or 10% yield to the debt market in Japan that's only getting 0.5 yield, they're going to bite on that all day long. And you can do that until the whole debt market's into Bitcoin through Metaplanet or strategy for that matter. So there's an extremely high torque to that. The challenge is just how do you scale that and how do you build products to bring that in? Because the maths right now, in other words, Bitcoin's doing a 60% yield on average, and these fixed income products, debt and others are so yield starved that they'll take anything that you're offering. You only have to offer them 2% of Bitcoin's yield, 5%. And you could hypothetically go all the way to 30% just for, a thought experiment, right? Like what if Metaplanet just said, hey, we're going to offer you 30% yield to the whole debt market, knowing that they can get $10 trillion over tomorrow, put it into Bitcoin, the fiat inflates away. They don't have to pay, they pay a hyperinflated currency back, and they've got, $10 trillion of Bitcoin, and they pay the loan back the next week. I mean, that's an extreme example, obviously, but it just shows you the game theory of what's going on here and, what's possible and why that number matters. And additionally, it matters because if you can tap that, you don't have to even do the ATM anymore. And if you wanted the mNAV to run to 100 because you're the CEO and you like the number 100, you could do that, right? And then you can also continue to do the share issuance to keep it at 100. But the idea is that once you have that fixed income product, you don't have to sell any more shares at all. You're just paying the interest rate to that market. And you can let that go as high as you want or can, if that makes sense. So you don't issue any more shares. There's a supply squeeze on that, and you're generating more yield, and the value of the company is exponential because you're generating such a high yield, acquiring more Bitcoin, and you're only paying a 5 to 10% interest rate on doing that. I think the challenge is just how do you do that? Why isn't Metaplanet doing it right now? What are the issues that are not letting them do that? I think the game theory, in my opinion, is that makes a ton of sense. My question is, Simon, why aren't you doing that? Why haven't you started doing that yesterday? And I guess that's kind of
I'm wondering if Khristina or Climb have an idea about that. I'm guessing that it's a matter of it takes a little while to get approved to sell a preferred stock, but I don't know the in and outs of those things on Wall Street or in Japan for that matter. Khristina or Climb, do you have any knowledge on why does it take a little while for these preferred stocks to come out of Tokyo? And all of that being said, we only 4 months, 2 months, 3 months, maybe 2-3 months away from Metaplanet just being in a decline on the stock price and not really have anyone's attention and not being interesting at all. So things have happened fast, to say the least. But Climb or Khristina, do you have any thoughts on why there's not a preferred stock from Metaplanet yet?
Climb, you want to go first this time?
Yeah, thanks. So I don't know a whole lot about this. My understanding is that there's 4 other preferreds in Japan. I think that Simon said that. I think I've heard that at least one other place. I think maybe Jake in the Discord found 3 or 4 of them or something like that. But And I don't think they yield very much. It might be 2.5%, 3% or something like that. I can't remember, but I do believe, just from asking Grok, it looks like a shareholder meeting is required to, however that's concerned, a change in governance or unexpected sort of share issuance like that. But that's a lot of our theory is that that could happen in September. If it doesn't, then call me over trusting now in Metaplanet. But if it doesn't happen in September, I would imagine there's a very good reason, because if it's 100% like total winning strategy to do, and they don't do it in September, then there must be some sort of a benefit to waiting, maybe to be part of an index first or something like that. I'm not really sure. There's really three parts to how I see preferreds. One is, so it's Bitcoin versus fiat arbitrage is the first two parts. Their Bitcoin, they're going to earn just as much as strategy or any other company does on the Bitcoin that they hold. So that's a level across the board, right? When you look at the arbitrage with preferreds, so that part is level, and then you look at the fiat arbitrage, the amount of yield they're paying, and something like strategy maybe is competing for attention in the U.S. and having to pay out 8, 9, 10% or whatever. Simon has mentioned partly because they have almost no preferred competition, and partly because you can't just throw a dart and have 10 or 20% returns in Japan. You can't just, here's my 5 favorite stocks and I expect them all to have double-digit returns. That's not how it works over there. Historically, it's not that easy to have returns. So that sort of arbitrage between the Bitcoin increase and the amount of yield they pay out is huge, because if Bitcoin decides that for the next 5 years it only earns 10% interest, and strategy is having to pay out 8 or 10%, they're not making very much. During that time period. There's a little bit of a difference because of how the compounding works on the Bitcoin if it were to make that. So it's a little fuzzier than I'm making it sound, I think. But yeah, still the spread there is going to be huge. It's going to even be a bigger deal in worse markets. That spread is going to be really, really important when the market doesn't return that much. That relative performance. And then the third part, if I can remember, because now I've lost my train of thought. Khristina, go ahead, and I'll see if I can remember it.
I think, with the feedback that Jesse's giving us in the chat and with Climb's comment, I do think it comes down to the shareholder meeting, which was just recently announced. They're doing a special shareholder meeting in September. So pure speculation would be that September meeting will be where they seek approval to potentially change the articles of incorporation to issue preferred stock in Japan. For those of you who don't know Jesse, Jesse's a part of True North, and he is a lawyer, a very smart lawyer, and has been paying attention to this particular space for quite some time. He was kind enough to take a call from me this morning when the Metaplanet announcement was made that they are, I want to get the terminology correct, contributing an additional $5 billion of capital to the U.S. And I saw a lot of different posts about it this morning. And just to clarify, they're not raising an additional $5 billion. They're basically contributing it to their U.S. entity. And I was speaking to Jesse about that this morning in terms of, what would be the legal reason to do that. And we kind of both came to the conclusion and agreed that it would allow them to then custody Bitcoin in the U.S. With U.S. custodians, potentially open up the door for U.S. broker dealers so that they would have access to, what are arguably the best, U.S. capital markets, whether it be for options. There may be, a path down the road where they have to have this, established capitalized U.S. entity to potentially offer preferred securities here. And so there's a whole bunch of different reasons to make that capital contribution, but it did sound like it was more of just kind of a legal technical change, an accounting change versus anything more than that.
Gotcha, and that makes sense, and also from here, thank you very much, Jesse, for chiming in. It does make a lot of sense that it's a matter of shareholder approval before doing something like issuing a new share class. So it makes sense, and the night is still young for Bitcoin. It's very early days. We are only at $100,000, and Bitcoin is going to 50 million plus. So we'll have time to get that those preferred stocks into the mix, and if that can mean accelerate, I'd like to see what that's going to do to Climb's numbers. There was a time when I was doing these shows, if I did a double thumbs up, there would be fireworks. I don't know if I can still do that. No, nothing, ain't nothing anymore. That's sad. Going downhill from Restream here, I can tell. Well, does any of you have any more thoughts on what we've spoken about now? The preferreds, Blake, what do you think about the response you're getting here? That it's probably just a matter of some legalities and possibly also, so LC mentioned, which I like, it's also a matter of critical mass and size for it to actually be worth it. Looking at Metaplanet, it's still a small stock compared to a lot of the names on Wall Street, to be honest. So probably makes sense. But any thoughts on the response, Blake?
Yeah, I do have a thought, but I do want to check in with Climb and see if he remembered what he wanted to discuss, and then I can jump into it.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Sort of the third part is that they, with the preferreds interest, I mean, this is sort of interesting to say, but Metaplanet already has a way to pay for it. They have the options income strategy where they generally sell puts with 5% of the cash raise. So if they're you can think of it, if they have $1 billion of Bitcoin, they probably have around 50 million in cash. That's just sort of maybe quarter by quarter. They seem to do sort of longer duration puts from what we know from their October disclosures. But every quarter, I sort of expect them to make more money than the previous quarter there, and it's not huge, but the income there is pretty good. They might be earning something like 30, 35, or even 40% a year on that, so outperforming Bitcoin with that portion of their cash. Most of 95% of the money they raise buys Bitcoin. Maybe 5% gets set aside and generates income like this. Some of that income then buys Bitcoin. I think that some of the income could pay the preferreds. And so, yeah, they already have proven that they have an income generation strategy that, when you do the math, could pay for an insane amount if they're only, if they're offering 3 to 5% or something on preferreds and earning 30% on their Bitcoin income strategy. Then, they could have, it's almost tenfold their income on the one end per dollar or per yen, whatever. And then the amount they have to pay out in premium on the preferreds. So that torque, that ability is really, really huge. It's already in place. They already have the payment, mechanism in place. And I like that as a solution more than just, we're going to sell, more preferred shares to cover the preferred payment, or we're going to sell more common shares to cover the preferred payment. I don't really personally like the feel of that. I don't think the strategy does that long term. I'm sort of surprised they're doing it now, to be honest. It works. It just doesn't quite sit right with me, and I would much rather have something like what Metaplanet has.
Any comments there, Blake, Khristina?
Yeah. Oh, Khristina, do you want?
No, go ahead.
Can I just say, it's such a polite panel I have on here. Like you're so kind to each other. It's awesome. Good people only, Blake.
It's interesting to think through, I guess, the game theory of the fixed income product and what that can do, and who's closer to scaling it, Metaplanet or MicroStrategy. And the thing with MicroStrategy, it feels like they're not. One, just because they're not. They've got the products out there and the market isn't buying it, and that might change because Trump does something or something happens. But right now, it isn't happening. It definitely isn't happening enough to be comparable to the yield that Metaplanet is generating. And the interesting thing that I keep going back to as a Bitcoiner, you're always like, why aren't people getting this? Why aren't countries buying it? Why isn't this happening? Whatnot. And Saylor says it all the time. It's just the need to know and that desire. And I think the thing that really excites me about Japan is that they've had 40 years of zombie stocks, zombie bonds, no returns. And so as soon as Metaplanet does the legal hurdles to get it on the market, they're gonna fight to get into to be placed into those particular products. And that's what I think we're seeing with the equity market right now for Metaplanet. It's some type of return. If you're measuring Bitcoin's returns in dollars, it hit an all-time high, I forget the exact date, a couple months ago. But I think it hit almost a year ago if you're measuring it in the yen, or even longer. I'll have to double check the math on that. But the point is that it hit a lot earlier, and that if you're measuring it in the currency that's inflating away faster, they're seeing outsized returns, and it's kind of their only hope, I would say, because it's the only stock. They don't, I think Khristina was mentioning it, like they don't have a Google and an Amazon and all these other companies that you can invest in or work for. So like as an individual, you can work in the New York Stock Exchange. You've got those companies I just mentioned. So there's a lot of opportunity. You feel like you're an individual in Japan. There's not a lot of that opportunity. There's only kind of one way out. And it's starting to feel like that pressure escape valve is through Metaplanet, right? And they're accessing Bitcoin through it. Obviously, they're getting returns, Bitcoin yield, and then they access that fixed income market. So that's where like it's interesting to think about MicroStrategy being ahead of Metaplanet in terms of actually having a product, but they can't tap into that demand the way Metaplanet will be able to in the future. So, part of me is almost thinking that they're further ahead because they have that capital pool that they can just plug into. And I don't know what legal hurdles they need to do to be able to launch those products, but it feels like once they can launch those products, it's going to have a lot more better response than what's kind of happening in the United States. And that's going to be huge to going back to the mNAV kind of game theory, and then launching it. The price of the stock could be even higher because the supply can just dry up. They don't have to issue any more ATM. And I think the other thing that doesn't excite me about the ATM reminds me of the cyclicality of Bitcoin in general. So what had to happen before was that you'd have the price spike up, it'd get a lot more attention, it'd get some news articles, it'd be on Facebook, social media, whatever. People would be able to say, hey, I told you so, you should still get into it. Then the hype cycle would drop off. And I think you've got the similar model with the ATM. If for some reason the equity investors stop piling in, it would kind of slow down. It doesn't have nearly the challenge that Bitcoin has because they're a company and they can do a lot of financial engineering to help kind of support their Bitcoin yield. But fixing into the fixed income market is a lot simpler of a model. You're almost draining a pool or whatnot versus trying to ride a wave. Like with the Bitcoin price and the 4-year cycle you're watching the waves crash along the beach. With this, like you're almost like just plugging into the fixed income product at the bottom of a pool or bottom of a well, and you're just taking the most pressure dense demand from that capital pool. And that's why I'm so excited about this fixed income product. Metaplanet and the Japanese market wanting to find yield through Metaplanet. And then the game theory, not to go on too long of a rant, but the game theory is interesting because we're talking about hyper Bitcoinization, back to what Klein was alluding to. This could accelerate, right? We're at sub 1% adoption. And so we're going to watch hyper Bitcoinization happen. And the question is, how is it going to happen? And it's going to happen in an area that's yield starved and equity starved, and the country is at a debt to GDP ratio that's through the roof. So they're going to continue to hyperinflate or inflate their currency at a high level. And there's only one exit strategy, and it's Bitcoin, and there's only one door, and it's Metaplanet for that country. And so they have to think about how to get out, and it's just incredibly bullish, obviously, that it's going to come through Metaplanet.
Yeah.
Klein, what's your thoughts on that? Do you have any? Is that a fair assessment, or would you agree, disagree? Any nuance differences?
Yeah, I think that's great. Like, I mean, what you're saying about it's about it being interesting that Strategy already has the products, but in a way, doesn't have all the advantages. And so I tried to write down as what Metaplanet has. So I tried to write down, what are sort of the 4 points of advantages that I think Metaplanet has with preferreds. And obviously they'll have, like we all know they'll have preferreds at some point. It's just a question of when, and hopefully this year. But they have less competition for preferreds, with only 4 other preferreds, I think, that are out there in Japan. They have more demand because yield or really returns of any kind are pretty hard to come by in Japan. Whereas, like I said, you could throw a dart in the US and find a stock that hits 10 or 20% in a year. It's like, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's not the challenge that it is in Japan. The third point, you have better spreads. In good years for Bitcoin or in bad years, that's going to become important. It's even more important in bad years. It's much more important. If Bitcoin gains 5% for 3 years in a row, sort of struggling, I don't expect it to do that, but if it does, and if Metaplanet is paying out 5%, then they didn't lose money on that deal. And in fact, if they're paying with their income generation strategy, which is 0.4, that Metaplanet has the income to pay for it without selling shares, right? Without that, which I don't really like as a permanent sort of solution for paying for preferreds personally. It's just not as clean. You don't actually have income. So it's like they have the infrastructure set up, and they just need to turn on the faucet. It's really neat. They have everything set up. Like, they have all these advantages. They just need to turn it on.
We're gonna have to have Jesse on here and tell us why they're not turning it on.
He said shareholder approval.
Shareholder approval, yeah, we'll have to wait for that. So people in the chat kept mentioning that Saylor just tweeted out a picture of their preferred stocks. That's what I was just throwing up on screen before. So I haven't had a lot of time to look at this, but it's interesting to see that the average daily trading volume of these 3 are massively higher than the rest of the market, which I think sucks a little bit, because I was hoping that there was this giant upside, but it seems like they're already doing really well in volume. So how are you going to sell $1 trillion worth of preferred? Maybe when the market wakes up and realize that that these should be AAA rated or whatever, as they're actually collateralized compared to some of the junk bonds out there, then they're backed by the only or the hardest asset ever known to mankind. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. I mean, this is a Metaplanet show, but we're talking about preferred stocks, and I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak about something that I'm not really qualified to speak on, but I think you made the comment about AAA credit ratings, and it's my understanding, unless there's been recent news, that particular credit ratings are actually what people are waiting for to potentially really get these securities much more attention. I
agree. Climb, any thoughts on that? Also, we've been going for 1.5 hours. I'm good here. I can go for another 10 minutes or so, no problem. Or if there's anything that you guys want to cover, I'm down for it. The sun is up late in Denmark. It's now 7:30 p.m. and the sun doesn't go down until 10 p.m. So I can get my evening walk easy later on. But I also want to be respectful of your time, although I'm having fun with Metaplanet Roundtable here and the inputs you guys have. Climb.
Yeah, I think that maybe sort of a fifth point. I'll try to make a thread about this, because maybe it's interesting. But a fifth point is that strategy. They're the trailblazer, and they couldn't just see they couldn't see the future. Even just thinking about mNAV, and I'm not an expert in mNAV. There's stuff that I realize about it all the time, and I'm like, wow, why didn't I realize that before? And a lot of that's just the market teaching me. The market responds a certain way, and then I'm like, okay, well, this is the way that physics works in the market, right? These are the different forces that seem to be at play here. So I just try to constantly improve that. But strategy did not turn on the preferreds until they were already huge. They're already an elephant. So even if they can raise, you know, $500 million or 1 billion or 5 billion or whatever, you know, per month or something like that, whatever, you know, random numbers I'm throwing out, but it's still, like Blake said earlier, isn't huge for their yield. You know, I think the shareholders prefer it to selling common. And it's been really neat. I think for the last few weeks, maybe they haven't sold any common or very little. I can't remember. But that sort of thing is very interesting. I don't think it's necessary. I think being able to do both is fine, and probably better mathematically. If you have a premium on the stock, why not sell some common as well, I guess, if it increases Bitcoin per share. But I do think, and I threw out the thought experiment maybe a week ago or so in a thread, like, Metaplanet could literally issue preferreds, pay for it with the income generation strategy that they already have, and never issue common again. And I'm not saying that that's like the optimal solution, but it's interesting that I think that they could do that. And they're small enough to where if they raised 100 million here and there from selling preferreds, that's a huge yield, right? Whereas strategy needs to sell billions of preferreds to really to make a dent. So they're starting late, and it's fine. I mean, it's fantastic. I love learning about the products, but Metaplanet being able to speed run the strategy game. I mean, it's like they're cherry picking and taking the very best parts of what strategy has done and optimizing it. And if you people that have looked at, obviously I wasn't at either one. I could say I was, and that would really mess with people. But the Orlando conference and the Vegas conference, there's a lot of pictures of Saylor with Simon. There's a lot of times, you hear Simon giving a ton of credit, of course, to Michael Saylor, and Saylor bringing up Metaplanet a bunch, and he continues to do so. I don't know of another LBE that Saylor is referencing more than Metaplanet, and I think there's a bunch of reasons for that. One, Metaplanet is the cleanest version, the sort of cleanest advertisement of what's possible. They're still young, so they're showing what's possible from, hey, we started 14 months ago, 15 months ago, and here's where we are now. They have the cleanest execution as far as I'm concerned, the cleanest exponential growth, and it's they're in another country, so they're not directly competing. So I think that's sort of helpful. I mean, they are competing, right? They're competing for the Bitcoin that they're buying. They both bid up the price of Bitcoin some, but they are very pleasant rivals. It's a friendly competition. And yeah, I'm also not ruling out Metaplanet having more Bitcoin than strategy. People think that's crazy. It's a question of probability. Do you think it's a 10% chance, or do you think it's a 1% chance? It's not zero. I promise it's not zero. And maybe it's just the preferreds. Maybe the preferreds are the mechanism to do so. Maybe they end the year with 100,000 Bitcoin or 150,000 Bitcoin. And I don't think that strategy ends the year with 1 million Bitcoin. They're going to be between where they are now and maybe 700, 750,000, something like that, probably.
Yeah.
And it is interesting to think about. They could have more Bitcoin than strategy, Metaplanet. Going to that analogy of the dam breaking, if they access that fixed income market, and when you start throwing trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars into Bitcoin to buy Bitcoin, you can really push the price up, and you're really writing your own ticket in that sense. If they're going to offer you 5 trillion, you can put that 5 trillion into Bitcoin. Obviously, these are simplified kind of rationale, but I think the math is there, and the logic and the incentives are there, and that pushes the Bitcoin price up by, what would 5 trillion coming in the next 6 months do? It's 10x the price, 20x the price, something like that, or 100x the price. And now they've got something that's valued that high, and then they're not issuing any more shares. I kind of lost my train of thought, but it's just incredibly. It's going back to, like, they could use that to, if the domino is falling in the capital markets of Japan first, that could go through Metaplanet, and that could help them outperform or get more coins than strategy. And it's not healthy to think about it that way, as they're not competing in that sense. They're a rising tide lifts all boats. But yeah, I think that's a way that they could potentially have more Bitcoin than Sailor and strategy is just a way of that happening. I had one other point, but I'll let someone else talk.
I will say I've been saying for many months, because some people kept saying that strategy has a monopoly. They have the most Bitcoin. No one will catch them, and likely no one will catch them. But my point was, it's not about how many Bitcoin you have. The product that's on sale is the capital products that gives Bitcoin exposure, and there is competition there. And I've seen plenty of people, half a year ago, my fellow LBE degens who were all holding strategy. It's just like, which strategy product are you holding? Oh, it's the common stock. Maybe it's some in a different type of leverage product. But I've seen many people selling strategy to buy Metaplanet instead. So that's the competition. There's competition for capital, and that's why strategy right now is stuck below mNAV 2. And I hope for strategy that with a lot of preferred sales, stock sales within the next 3 months, that they'll get back above 3. That would be nice for strategy. I'd be very happy to see that. I have not sold any strategy myself to hold Metaplanet, but Metaplanet has become my biggest position here, thanks to the performance. Khristina, I can see you have something that you want to add.
Well, I think the only other kind of important point that I'd like to make is that, just with respect to Bitcoin and where I think we are with Bitcoin adoption, I mean, Jerome Powell said today that, the banks are able to offer, he used the term crypto products. And I can assure you now that, those doors are open. Every bank, not just the big banks, I even know of small and medium-sized banks that are hiring bankers and analysts to cover the space, educate their clients on Bitcoin-related equities. And I think, once the broader population learns more about Bitcoin, we're going to see another much bigger leg higher. I think when I spoke at Bitwise and Michael Saylor presented there a couple of months ago, he made the very good point that only 4 fund managers last year outperformed the S&P 500, and no one outperformed Bitcoin. And the more that Wall Street, the more that retail investors understand Bitcoin as an investment and Bitcoin-related equities as an investment, and how they have outperformed in the past and continue to outperform today, it's just going to continue to fuel, the demand cycle.
And none of them outperformed Climb with Metaplanet, the hedge funds. So they didn't outperform Bitcoin. They didn't outperform Metaplanet. So it's crazy.
Metaplanet is the new hurdle rate within investments, and Bitcoin is the hurdle rate within money. But still, no, investments that can't even surpass money, like just safe Bitcoin money, should not even be considered. So anything you guys want to add to this conversation here, this topic?
Just my last point, and is that, like, going back to Climb's point, like the factor they're open sourcing all this information, right? Like they're sharing it, the best practices. So what is the differentiation, of all these different companies if they're sharing the best practices, right? And you assume that they will start to take on whatever is successful with another company into their company, unless there's some kind of government regulation. It is that capital pool that we were talking about before, and setting that up. That is the difference, is the demand from the debt market and the equity market to flow into Bitcoin through the different Bitcoin treasury companies, Metaplanet in this case. In the UK, it's Smart Web, and in France, it's the Blockchain Group. I think that, to me, is kind of one of the reasons, like, I'm long-term bullish on Metaplanet, and of course their competency to be able to just replicate or be a little bit more efficient with the playbook, so to speak.
They certainly are. Khristina, Klein, anything you want to add to that? Otherwise, I have one last topic I want to throw into the mix.
Klein?
No, I think that's all pretty good.
So before I go to the topic, I mentioned it for you guys in the green room before we started, but LC has a question here, and I'd love to share my thoughts on that because I've been thinking about that over the last week. Thoughts on potential merger and acquisition / consolidation across the field with a plethora of undifferentiated entrants, notably when mNAV starts to collapse or adverse market conditions arise. My thoughts on that is if a company that is doing well, be it Metaplanet, Strategy, Blockchain Group, SWC, whatever, want to buy another company, well, if it has an mNAV above 1, they could get more Bitcoin by just going out and buying Bitcoin. But, and I don't know the legalities of that or how that works, if you can do a merger and acquisition without having to ATM the common stock first, so it wouldn't hinder or slow you down or take funds away from ATM activity, a merger acquisition with a company with a smaller mNAV would be immediately accretive the way I see it. But you wouldn't want to do that if it means it's at the cost of buying Bitcoin, because you can buy Bitcoin at mNAV 1, if you know what I mean. I don't know if you guys have some comments on that. Otherwise, we can move on. So the last thing that I have is something that just kind of struck me today. Loving Metaplanet, they're killing it. Execution is flawless. It's really looking very promising, as we all agree here. And then I was thinking, all right, well, what do we have in US? Because we have, I don't know, how many listed LBEs do we have by now? A dozen, 2 dozen, something like that. And I was thinking, all right, so what's the one in US that's killing it? And I can't mention one LBE in US right now is killing. Of course, Strategy has been the one, maybe up until recently, and I'm looking forward to see them kicking it back in gear again soon. But right now, the way I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see anyone really performing a great yield for their shareholders right now. It's not.
I agree with you.
Blake?
Yeah, I think.
Or Klein, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. I think that, and I don't know a whole lot about how all these have spun up, to be honest, but like UTXO management with a lot of the names that have spun up, they're spinning them up in different countries. And I'm not sure if they've spun up more than one in any country. I don't think that they have. And I think that that's probably by design. And just like Sailor is very friendly with Metaplanet, they're competition, but they're not competition. They're competition on different soil. And if you can imagine like Strategy having a huge amount of Bitcoin, or the US having all the mining, all the Bitcoin miners, like we don't want that. We want other countries to participate. Otherwise, we're playing a game by ourselves, and that's not good. Like, what if only one country appreciated gold and hoarded gold, right? And no other country cared at all about gold? That wouldn't be good. Like, that's not great. That's not good staying power. So you want strong competition in all countries, and then it boils down to appetite, regional advantages, and stuff like that, which is why if Metaplanet picked up and moved to just about any other country, I wouldn't be very interested. The volume is boring. People ignore it, but it's hugely important and indicative of inflows and thirst for that company, and exposure to Bitcoin and exposure to something that potentially can beat Bitcoin. So I think these companies have been pretty careful about not stepping on each other's toes. And to your point, Anders, like, there are there's other companies in the US, Semler is one, but, they're providing about the same yield with like a much tinier stack, a little over 1% of Bitcoin the strategy has, and they're barely able to provide more yield. And they've had their struggles, and I kind of personally consider them like a Bitcoin ETF with a call option on being able to do something that I don't expect them to be able to do. So I'm not saying that they're a bad investment, but obviously I'm in Metaplanet. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of game theory going on, and I'm definitely not a game theory expert, but it's neat to see how cordial all of these companies have been, and how really they're just setting up shop in different, with different flags all over the world.
Yeah. Khristina.
I have nothing to add to Climb's comments. No.
Blake.
Yeah, I think it's really good that, Climb mentioned it. What is the differentiator? You mentioned, well, if Metaplanet moved to some of these geographical locations where these companies are starting up, you wouldn't be as excited about it. And I think, it's really healthy to think logically through that, which, what if the management team switched, or if the countries got switched, which would you be more bullish on, and why? And trying to think through that, like, is Metaplanet management team 10 times greater than MicroStrategy or Strategy? I don't think so. And then, what were the size differentiations? I mean, a lot of these companies are going from like 1 Bitcoin to 100 Bitcoin. So there's obviously size and scale there. And so, thinking about this, it's the math is like the size of the company, enterprise value, the amount of kind of Bitcoin they have, times like is a function of the velocity, how much money they can continue to bring in, as well as the torque. So if they're doing the ATM through the equity, that doesn't provide as much torque, but it's a lot of money coming in, versus the fixed income product, which is a ton of torque or influence in the price, and it doesn't dilute the shareholders that much. So I'm getting a look from you, Anders, so maybe I didn't explain that correctly, but really what that means is that there's a size of scale, and the smaller you are, it's easier to get the first kick of $1 million or $2 million or $10 million, and it makes you look really great. But the question is, what can you continue to do? Going back to Climb's kind of question, what if we switch the companies around? Would you want to stay with the management team? Would you want to stay with the market? Would you want to stay with some other factors that is clearly the differentiator? And I keep going back in my head, and I'm going to love anyone's pushback on this, is that capital market that they can plug into, as well as having a good management team that can build the products and follow the playbook that Saylor's creating, and they're all kind of open source creating in that sense. And good. And the last part about that is just, and then being able to, the last kind of level is that fixed income product. If they can somehow do that, quickly, that'd be the golden ticket, so to speak. And the closer you get to that, I think the better off you are. And I think Metaplanet and MicroStrategy are the closest.
Yeah, no, I agree
I
with
think-
you. If it's a brand new, much smaller LBE, it's easier to show a rocket ship like Bitcoin yield performance. It's crazy. This industry is so young. As I was saying to Khristina yesterday, if you have the way I look at it now, so there's the brand new entrants, of which there's about, I don't know, 100. And I'm not staying on top of all of those. I will peek at them when they've been doing well for like a month and a half or something like that, maybe. But otherwise, I just don't have the energy for that. But the industry is so young that if you have one full quarter behind you, right, which Blockchain Group does, which Metaplanet does, and all it means is, if you were here at the entrance of this year, which is less than 6 months away, you have a full Q1 behind you, then I think it's relevant to look at, well, what's your quarter to date in Q2 performance, and to go back and just quickly have a look at that. So let me just get the right screen up again here. To quickly have a look at that, of all those companies, not many actually have the track record of one full quarter behind the before the existing, but Metaplanet does and Blockchain Group does, and that's where Blockchain Group has delivered 64.5% Bitcoin yield quarter to date, and Metaplanet has done 108% quarter to date. I'll take that one down again. So it's pretty insane that if you've been here for 6 months, you're mature in the industry. But that's how fast it's going, and there's definitely gonna be some of these rockets that are just gonna burn up before they leave gravity, and they'll get sucked back down to Earth in some massive crashes, in my opinion. And mNAV doesn't reach takeoff, and that comes back down with gravity to 1, and then you're just a zombie LBE. Any thoughts on that? Quick.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
I think just that the mNAV, I might be the outlier here, but I don't think the mNAV's gravity is 1. People kind of saying that, alluding to that. I think it's more kind of Sailor made the analogy of once you get something to space and the outside of the gravity well, it can go forever. It can go to infinity. And because fiat has no bottom, Bitcoin has no top, Metaplanet and MicroStrategy also mNAV has no top. And that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it. Not so much like there's a gravity back down to 1. Like once these companies can't acquire more Bitcoin per share, that's not the best way to think about it, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. Like there's also like something we haven't discussed, but there's a little bit, Raekwon has talked a little bit about more is like when they know that they can't generate more yield or high enough yield, they can do other things. They'll always have that ability to kind of generate that yield, and they'll stop issuing shares. So one of the ways, sorry to ramble on this,
can I just comment on that?
Yeah.
Is it okay? I jump in on that one. So I think the reason why you won't see mNAVs, go towards infinity is, as an investor, you're looking to have the high BTC yield generating machine at the most affordable cost. And if you have Metaplanet, which we do right now, generating 108% yield in less than a quarter, and you're only paying 7 mNAV, then you have to have incredible yield for me to pay 10 mNAV. Because at only the cost of 7, actually less than 7 right now, it's a buy the dip opportunity, I think, on Metaplanet. Not financial advice. This is only financial entertaining. Never take financial advice from a guy wearing a tie on top of a t-shirt and a cap. That's for sure, right? And hanging out with his friends on the internet. But you would have to, like, Metaplanet is the hurdle rate there when it comes to LBs, and when you can get that kind of yield and pay less than 7 mNAV, that's where my money is. Blake, I don't know if you want to go back and build on. Well, there was the second point there you had, or if climb.
Yeah, I guess just to wrap on the infinity mNAV versus gravity of 1, it's like if they just stop issuing shares and they have ability to generate yield, it quickly goes to infinity type of thing. And then the game theory goes back into, all right, well, do they want to issue shares at 100 mNAV or 50? Or so that kind of goes into what the management can do to continue to generate yield. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just an interesting thing of, is there a reflective process upwards to a higher number, or more of a gravity that you mentioned before? And I'm not convinced yet that there's a lower gravity aspect, especially once they start to implement some of these fixed income tools and they don't have to issue as many shares. And the management team gets to choose when they want to issue it. And it becomes a discretionary, what's the most accretive? Is it 100 mNAV? Is it 50? Is it 25? That just kind of comes down to the math that they're mathing and their preferences and some of the other dynamics. But again, kind of more their choice. So that was my only thought there.
Yeah, and Blake, that's why I love doing it, and that's why I love having smart people like you guys on. Is for this conversation, for me to fine tune and hone in on my own thesis and find out, where am I thinking wrongly, where can I improve, so how can I best invest my own money. Khristina or Climb, anything you want to add to that? Right. Then I want to say, so Tommy D here has an interesting chat. This goes along actually with my my own analysis, and I'm gonna make a show soon where I just go through the overall how I think this is all going to play out if we look across the different LBEs. And what I'm thinking right now is there's going to be a winner in each market because there's some local things that does that. For instance, in France, they don't have an ETF. They can only buy an LBE if they want Bitcoin ETF, right? So there's going to be an LB that's killing it there. That's very likely to be Blockchain Group. Love it. That's awesome. Same thing in UK. You have SWC, then there's Concilium and one other. Will there be one winner? That might be the case, but I think that'll be the first place we'll see if a market can carry more than one. However, on top of that, on top of each market having, I think, at least one like very successful winner, I also think that there's people like us and the way we move our money around to get the best possible return. There's going to be one global winner on top of that just does the best globally and then attracts from the global pool across national borders. And I see Metaplanet as that right now. And I think we all do, to be honest. But please correct me if I'm wrong. But that's how I'm seeing it. There's going to be one global winner. Each country is going to have a local winner. Whoever is the global winner will also naturally be the winner in its own country. And Metaplanet is looking like that right now, in my opinion. But, things can change.
Yeah, I agree. One global winner, and I agree that global winner is shaping up to be Metaplanet. I agree that there will be one winner in each, kind of market. And I also think, and I know there were some questions earlier today and some news that Japan may be considering allowing, Bitcoin ETFs and potentially lowering, the tax rate or capital gains on Bitcoin. I don't see that as a risk to Metaplanet. I mean, people had the same fears when US ETFs were being introduced and what that would do to MicroStrategy. Like, why would you own MicroStrategy when you can just own an ETF? Well, you could also just own Bitcoin, right? And there's a reason that you own leveraged Bitcoin equities, because you hope to outperform Bitcoin. And so I don't necessarily think that, Japanese Bitcoin ETFs changes the thesis here at all.
I completely agree with that, Climb. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Otherwise, in the meantime, I just want to say shout out to Tommy D here. Listening to this is so hard not to YOLO 10,000 shares at the market. That's right. You market by that. Don't worry about that limit. You just smash it, move the market. Tommy, come on, you can do it. I'm kidding.
10,000 won't move the market in Metaplanet.
There you go.
It's so liquid. It's great. I mean, talking about liquidity, how many millions of shares Metaplanet trades a day? I was looking at somewhere earlier today, not from a long perspective, and noticed that there were only 11,000 shares on the tape at the time I was looking. And I was just kind of shocked at the relative illiquidity versus a Metaplanet.
Things are looking good over there. So before we potentially go to, or we will, any final thoughts here? I don't know what's going on, kind of, but I guess I am living, breathing LBEs right now, and that's why I'm putting out a lot of content, because I'm just having an absolute ball with this. Okay, I can see it's not really possible to see what is here, and I promise during this summer I'll get more professional and start using thumbnails. All my shows have the same background picture there as thumbnail before the show actually goes live. But for those who are interested in this, then 5:30 Eastern time tomorrow, I have the CEO Eddie Travier and advisor James from Concilium, which is the number 2 in UK. I have them on to explain what's going on there with Concilium. I have no idea, but I'm looking forward to learn more about that. Then Smarter Web Wednesdays number 2 with Brian Brookshire, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. We're doing a deep dive into SWC. I'm also doing that Thursday with Smarter Web Wednesdays number 3 with James, not the same James, another James, also SWC. And then Wednesday next week, Smarter Web Wednesdays number 4 with CEO Andrew Webley, who was on here last week. He's coming back on. We just kind of hit it off. well in the green room before and after and during the show last Wednesday when I started covering SWC. And we agreed that it'll probably be good to come back every other week and just let people know what's going on with SWC. And that is one of those brand new, listed around 2 months ago companies. So just interesting to follow and to learn. But that's 4 more shows lined up for the next 8 days. And then I'm pretty sure I'll add some more to that because we got to talk leverage Bitcoin equities. Any final words from you guys? Ladies first, Khristina.
Say not financial advice, but continue to stack your Bitcoin sats and buy Metaplanet.
Yeah, it's not financial advice, it's financial entertainment. But if you do like the financial entertainment, if you like the Anons, if you like the different color caps, if you like Blake's very neat bedroom, hit that, smash that like button. Smash the like button. No, I appreciate it, Blake. I really appreciated how you cleaned it up like super. I've never seen my own home in that condition. I think
my mom's watching you guys. I gotta be on point here.
I love it. All right, but since we're with you now, Blake, any final words?
Yeah, I think it's just important for Bitcoiners and no coiners to really evaluate this space. This isn't an FTX. This isn't a closed-end trust like GBTC. There's a lot of that unhealthy or not really thought out thinking kind of floating around this space. And I would implore my no coiner friends to evaluate Bitcoin and put the due diligence in, as like Climb has alluded to or shared with his graphs, that has really high yields and returns. And you just don't want to miss that opportunity just because you weren't thinking about it. So really take your time to evaluate, come up with your own risk framework and make a decision, but don't just ignore it or hand wave it away. I'll kick it off to Climb.
Thank you, Climb. So before we go to you, Climb, Tommy, he hit the buy button, got 1,000 shares at 11.08. Good on you. Your future self, I think, is gonna thank you tremendously for that. That is an epic price to be picking up Metaplanet, in my opinion, not financial advice. Climb, final words, and again, thank you for all your analysis and to all of you for jumping on here. I really appreciate having this conversation with you guys. It helps me improve my game, and Climb always leaves me way more bullish. I just don't have any more money. Climb.
Yeah, I understand the sentiment there. And that's awesome to do a smash by during the live show, Tommy, so that's cool. I'll say every day is interesting. We want disclosures. We want to find out how many warrants have been exercised. There's some details there. They don't have to announce every time they do anything. Evo sort of and Metaplanet announcing, I think it's 10% of each series is the threshold for disclosure if it's like the last one. So basically, if they sell like 18.5 million out of Series 20 or Series 21 or Series 22, I believe that's the threshold. So we haven't had a single one yet. We'll get one, I bet, within the next week. And really, it's just a game of updating. Like for me, it's updating these graphs. A lot of the thesis has been shared. A bunch of us have shared a bunch of ideas and keep exploring more. And for me, daily, it's just updating the graphs, converting some of them to Japanese now, and seeing how much quicker they're able to stack than my predictions. And that's really exciting. I love it when they crush my numbers.
Yeah, it's interesting how Evo now can buy more shares without having to disclose, and hopefully we'll see some announcement before the next Metaplanet Roundtable number 5, where I hope all 3 of you can make it back here next Tuesday, 9 a.m. PST, 12 noon Eastern time, and 6 or as we say 1800 Central European time here in Denmark. Yeah, looking forward to see if there's a need to upgrade on any of those models and price predictions. Climb. We don't mind a bit of hopium. So also just again, thank you all, Khristina, Climb and Blake for being here. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to have this conversation. I enjoy it a lot. That's why I personally do it, to get educated by you guys and have that conversation. And thank you to 3,400 live viewers right now across X and YouTube. Appreciate you watching this. Thank you for your support and fun comments in the chat. And thanks for those smash buys, Tommy. We're liking it. All right, on that note, hope you can make it back next Tuesday. Until then, until tomorrow morning, I'll